There is a time for everything. A time for change.
लाइफ बदलने वाला है तुम्हारा.
A time for the epic.
Semua berakhir sekarang.
The unimaginable. The unthinkable. A time for the heartfelt. The upbeat. A time for the stories never been told.
Some people that they have this story in their mind. They want to talk, they want to speak it out.
The bright sparks. The creative geniuses.
When I was 18, the thing I wanted more than anything was to make a movie.
A time for the light-hearted.
It is all going down today.
And a time for the strong-willed.
गणेश गैतुंड है मैं सर्वशक्तिशाली इकलौता भगवान है.
Apa yang gue lakuin sekarang harusnya gue lakuin dari dulu.
But above all, it's time for Asian storytellers. That time is now. There is a time for everything. A time for change.
This next.
Thank you. I hope you all enjoyed that. I particularly enjoy watching it because I think it does a good job of underscoring how much Netflix is really investing in Asia in terms of new content that we're creating, in terms of the jobs that creating that content brings, in terms of the local impact on economy and all the benefits that Netflix is bringing to the region, and in particular into India as well. Because what we're doing, I mean, beyond the benefit, beyond the impact of that, is that we're creating local stories that are being told by local voices, and we're being able to share that around the world, and I think that's a huge benefit. And so as we create this local content, it's more important than ever for us to protect that content as well. And so what I do is I fight piracy as an attorney for Netflix. I've been doing it for 2 years with Netflix, and prior to that for 6 years with 20th Century Fox. But I don't think of it as fighting piracy. As I mentioned, I think about it as protecting content, because that's really what we're trying to do, is to make sure that we have continued investment in local territories and local countries and regions around the world, and that we can share those stories around the world. So I've been doing that professionally for 8 years, fighting piracy. But my experience with piracy goes back a little bit farther. It goes back about 20 years to when I first went to college at the University of California. And I was introduced to a program called Napster. And so Napster, what that did, for those that don't know, it was a program that allowed people to share music. And that's how they called it. They called it sharing. But really what it allowed you to do was to download pretty much any song you wanted in the entire world. You could just put something into a search, you could click download, and you'd have it, and you'd be able to play it. And it didn't feel wrong to me as a college student, because there was something that I wanted. And it was easy. I could just click a button and download it, and then I could play it and listen to it. So it was something I wanted, and it was something that was easy to access. And there was nothing anywhere that said, hey, what you're doing is wrong, that this isn't okay, that this is illegal. So it was really at the forefront of technology that this was happening. And there was no guidance, nothing to suggest that we shouldn't be doing that. And so for me, 20 years ago, to when I would download music and play it and enjoy it, to now when I'm fighting piracy, fighting this exact same kind of thing happening. How did I get there? How did I get from 20 years ago when it seemed like it was okay to now? And there were a few different things that happened. One was that there became a public awareness that this kind of activity wasn't okay. And more importantly, people began to fight piracy. They started to limit the availability of it. And that overall shape of things has affected how I view piracy today. And so I view it in what I call 4 quadrants of piracy. And it's pretty straightforward. On one axis, you have piracy availability, and on the other axis, you have demand. And it's either low or high, and it's really that simple. So on one hand, if you have low piracy availability and low demand, you would think, okay, well, that's a good thing, but it's not, because the demand for the content that you're creating is low, and nobody wants that. You put in effort to creating good content, and you want people to want it. And if nobody wants it, that's not a good thing. But on the other hand, there's no piracy. Again, probably because nobody wants it. On the other hand, if you have high demand but low piracy availability, that's really the gold standard. That's where you want to be as a content creator, as a company. That's where you want to be as an industry. Because what it means is that you're creating good content that people want to watch, but that they can't find it available through pirated means. So they go to legitimate sources, and they get back to the economy. They get back, whether it's through subscription, whether it's going to a theater, whether it's subscribing to pay TV, whatever it is. That's really where you want to be, is high demand but low availability. And over here, you have low demand but high piracy availability. Well, you think high piracy availability, well, that's not good. But then again, if nobody really wants the content, it doesn't matter how much is out there. The piracy isn't going to have an impact. But where you do run into trouble is when you end up with high piracy demand, or high piracy availability and high demand, because that means that you're creating good content, but that it's all over the place, and anybody can get that for free. So there's no return on investment, and all the work and the effort that you put into creating that content, it goes away because you can't sustain it. And so when you run into high demand for good content and high piracy availability, that's where you have a big problem. That's where you run into a big red X. And that's where it's important as a content creator to fight piracy. And how do you do that? Well, as Netflix, as a content creator, what we can do is we can try to mitigate the impact of pirate availability. So as an individual company, as an individual entity, we can do things like notice and takedown. So working directly with the source of these files to try to remove them from availability. We can work with intermediaries like Google, so that when somebody tries to search for something, if they go and search sacred games free online, what kind of search results come up? If there's pirated search results, people are going to click on them. But we can work with Google to try to prevent those from coming up so that the legitimate sources are what people find. We can work as, in addition to doing the intermediary strategies, we can work directly with host services to try to remove pirate sites. And these are all things that we can do as an individual company. But what we're really doing is we're treating the symptoms as opposed to the cause. And so if we can try to mitigate the availability, that helps, but it doesn't really have an impact on piracy. It doesn't change the pirate ecosystem. It doesn't have an impact on that entire marketplace. And so in order to really do that, you have to work as an industry. You have to come together, not just one rights holder, but a whole lot of rights holders, a whole lot of content creators to join in a global effort to really fight piracy. And that's what we did by joining the ACE, the Alliance for Creativity and Entertainment. ACE is a global alliance of companies that works together. We have 30 members in various parts of the world. And at its core, there's 8 governing board members, which are the 6 major motion picture studios that are part of the MPA. So Fox, Disney, Sony, Paramount, NBC Universal, and Warner Brothers, joined by Amazon and joined by us, Netflix. And so we set strategies around the world to try to take action against pirate sources, to try to take action that's going to have a meaningful impact in mitigating the impact of piracy and really trying to treat the actual causes of piracy. And so we've worked together with them for about a year and a half now. We're in the 2nd year of it, and we've had some good successes. So some of the things that we do through ACE is we make use of all the tools that are available to us. So as individual rights holders, we try to mitigate piracy through those means that I've talked about, but together as an industry, we can make use of civil tools that are available, we can make use of criminal tools, and we can make use of regulatory and legislative solutions to piracy. So over the past year, through ACE, We've worked, again, as intermediary strategies, so outreach to different search engines, hosting providers, domain name registrars, to try to really deal with pirate websites that don't typically respond to things like DMCA notices. Pirate apps and devices, which has become a growing problem, particularly in Asia, which are these little devices that you can plug into your television. You buy it for like $100 US, and you plug it in, and then you have right there on your television access to all sorts of content, all of Netflix's content, all of Hollywood's content, all of India's entertainment and media available right there at the click of a button. And it's $100, so that's a direct substitute from people wanting to subscribe or people wanting to go to a theater. One of the biggest threats in this was a program called Kodi that people had created infringing apps and add-ons. And so what we did was we engaged in a series of what we called knock and talks, which is basically we conducted investigations to determine who was behind these apps and add-ons. We showed up at their door and we said, hey, here's a settlement agreement, you stop doing that and we don't have to pursue anything legally against you. And that had a massive impact. So we did it across the globe, serving 65 different knock and talks through 20 different countries, and the impact has been remarkable. What we saw was a 78 to 99% reduction in the use of the repositories, so where people would go to actually download these apps and add-ons. And then we saw, even more importantly, a 26 to 31% reduction in non-targeted repositories. So what that means is that while we eliminated a number of sources, even the sources that we hadn't targeted, piracy went down. Because as word got out, people began to understand, okay, these boxes are not legal. The devices themselves might be fine, but with all of these apps that are put on there specifically to allow people to watch infringing content, the word got out, this isn't what you're supposed to do. And so actual use of it from places that weren't even targeted went down, which is a huge win. And the real big win was that we saw an 11% reduction in visits to pirate sites in the wake of this, and a 10% increase in visits to legal sites on those same devices. So the devices themselves, people started using them to actually access content the way it was supposed to. So civil litigation, we've made use of that as well, particularly in the US, where we've had some lawsuits intended to get precedent so that we can then take that precedent and use it and apply it in other situations. So for instance, with these device manufacturers, if we can create legal precedent that says these devices used for the intent and purpose of infringing content is illegal, then we can then take that and expand that. And we can show that to people and say, and help to get these other things shut down and show what kind of an impact that we can have. So criminal referrals. When civil options aren't sufficient, we have to often refer to law enforcement to help. And criminal referrals can be an effective alternative. So as ACE, we filed 38 different cases across North America, South America, Europe, and Asia. So truly a worldwide effort. And we've seen some great successes, particularly in Thailand, where we saw shortly after the filing of a criminal referral, the takedown of 123 Movies, which was a ring of websites, the biggest ring of websites, pirate websites in the world at the time. So as we began those discussions with law enforcement, suddenly this pirate website disappears. And so that kind of shows you the impact that really even filing criminal referrals and awareness that these criminal referrals can have. But it's really incumbent upon law enforcement to work with the industry and to collaborate, to share the knowledge that we have and the investigative resources, and to really see these through to the end. So in terms of regulatory and legislative efforts, site blocking, which is now available in 45 different countries, is possibly the most effective means to preventing piracy. Because what it effectively does is pirate websites in certain countries where it's blocked are no longer available. And so different member companies of ACE have engaged in legislative and administrative site blocking around the world, and the results have been exceptional because, again, what we see is visits to these pirate sites go down, and more importantly, those visits start coming up to legitimate sources. So you see an increase in the legitimate purchase, legitimate download, the legitimate subscription of the content that we're trying to protect. So as we're looking forward to what's going to be happening in ACE, there's hopeful to be an increase in higher volumes of these in key markets like India. So speaking of India, the piracy here is growing. So from 2016 to 2017, we saw a 30% rise in peer-to-peer piracy. And peer-to-peer piracy is the kind that's most popular here in India, because as the broadband infrastructure continues to improve and expand, we'll likely see an increase in streaming. But for now, the majority of people prefer to download that content. And so that's why we see these huge rises, because content's becoming more and more popular. People are becoming more aware that you can download this. But there's not necessarily that same level of awareness that what you're doing is illegal, or the impact that it has in terms of the local economy, the local market, the local creative efforts. In terms of where India ranks at the global scale for piracy, it's currently number 2 in piracy traffic. So ACE conducted a study looking at the top 20 markets, and it was second only to Russia. So it's a pretty significant amount of piracy that we see. 62% piracy reach. So what that means is the percent of total people that we surveyed in this study acknowledged that they had engaged in some form of piracy. So 62% of all people that we spoke to said that they had pirated some kind of content, and that's a huge number. And even more troubling was that 36% of all watching of entertainment content in India, according to the study, was infringing, which meant that 64% was not. 64% was legitimate, but almost over a third was pirated content. Looking just at Netflix's content, Stranger Things, one of our biggest global series, what we saw that the second highest level of piracy was in India. So no surprises there. It mirrors what we saw. Second only to Russia, but just barely. But it was also almost 2 times that of Brazil, and almost 3 times that of the piracy levels that we saw in the United States. As I mentioned, we put a lot of effort into creating local content. And one of those series that we curated was Sacred Games, which was a big success story for us. When you look at piracy for local content here in India, it's even more remarkable because it had the highest level of global piracy. It was more than 3 times that of Stranger Things, which, as I said, was one of our biggest global hits. But it was also more than 11.5% or 11.5 times higher than the next highest country in terms of piracy. So more people were watching it here in India, but the piracy numbers were just outstanding when you look at it compared to the rest of the globe. And it was almost 55 times higher than Russia, which is known to be the highest piracy country. So what does this all mean? Where does that leave us in terms of what we can do as an industry to fight piracy, to actually start treating the causes of these rather than just the symptoms, try to mitigate that impact? Well, what it means is that we have to work together because it's an industry problem. So as a group of global content creators, ourselves through ACE, to work together to fight this. And what that requires is it requires the collaboration with local law enforcement and with local government. So we'll continue to do what we can to mitigate that impact through the tools available to us civilly, but we have to work on criminal referrals. We have to work on legislative and regulatory options as well. So we need stronger policies that allow us to have an impact against piracy. We need to work with law enforcement so that when we do criminal referrals, that we can share knowledge, we can share that strategy, we can share all the investigative efforts that we've had, but more importantly, to have an expedited and expeditious resolution of the matters. Because far too often what happens is criminal referrals will get done and then it takes years and years, and by then, piracy hasn't developed. It's gone on and it's grown. And so we need collaboration with law enforcement. We need quick resolutions. And we need to work together as well to have stronger policies in place to protect content and to fight piracy, and to work together to make sure that things like site blocking, regulatory and administrative, are smooth and fast and actually have a big impact. Because once we do those things together as an industry, we can really start to begin to fight piracy, to have an actual impact, to protect content, and to really work together to find the right solutions to have an impact against the piracy problem that